Okay. It shows that it is going to Facebook Mosaic America. It is live on YouTube, Mosaic Silicon Valley. Can somebody check San Jose Museum of Art YouTube real quick if you're getting it?
I see us on the Mosaic page, and I will go check the San Jose Museum of Art's YouTube.
Okay, thank you. Listen.
I see some of you have already joined us. We're going to give a couple more minutes for more of our audience to join, and then we'll have Robin from the museum welcome us all officially. Hey, Sarah.
Okay.
Hi back, Prakriti. If you're just joining us, we're going to give the rest of us a couple more minutes to join. We are right at 6 o'clock. We'll probably begin in a minute. All right, Robin, it's 6:01, and we have healthy participation from the audience in terms of numbers. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Priya. Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. It's still light out, so I guess it's afternoon, right? Good evening, everybody. My name is Robin Treen, and I work at the San Jose Museum of Art. And this is our regular, one of our regular Third Thursday series programs tonight, which we are hosting in conjunction with our good friends at Mosaic Silicon Valley. And this program is being held in celebration of Women's History Month, which this is. And I think it is important tonight to note that for this particular Women's History Month this year, March 2021, it's sort of bookended by a couple of very noteworthy events. On the one hand, the 2020 election left us with the highest representation in Congress by women that we have ever had, which we are now up to a whopping 27% women representing us in Congress, which, considering that we're 52% of the population, I think we have a little room left to grow. And then the other thing I think sort of we're offering this program also, I want to just acknowledge in the shadow of another mass shooting in the United States, one that had 9 victims, 8 of whom were killed. 7 of those 8 were women, and 6 of those 7 were Asian women. And so I do want to acknowledge that event and another act of misogyny, but also the intersectionality of that as well, because it seems really important to acknowledge that right now. So I do want to just acknowledge those victims as well. So anyway, that's it. So again, we're very pleased to be working with our good friends Mosaic Silicon Valley tonight. And I think we have a really interesting lineup of programming by, for, and about women tonight. So I will turn it over to my good friend Priya Das at Mosaic Silicon Valley. And it's my pleasure to introduce her, and take it away, Priya.
All right, Robin, we are actually very happy that the museum has finally opened up.
Yes,
you want to kind of announce that again?
Oh, yes, I did want to announce that. I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, the museum has reopened on a very limited basis. So we've reopened within both the CDC and the Santa Clara County Health Guidelines. So we're open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You can check the website for hours and for ticketing and to see what's on view. So for those of you who, after a year of pandemic, are climbing the walls, I'm sure there's some people who are just ready to lose it. The museum actually offers a really wonderful, safe, contemplative place to go and have a nice cultural experience that's not at home and not staring at your own four walls. So yes, please do come and visit us and take advantage of this opportunity. And thanks for reminding me, Priya.
Oh, absolutely. We love, like we've always said, the museum is like a second home to Mosaic Silicon Valley. You've opened your arms wide for us at every juncture, and we love it. And then you've had so many programs with us, like today. So just 30 seconds about why we are calling this show Then is Still Now. The reason is simple. It's because what plagues humankind and womankind today is no different from what used to happen many years ago, centuries ago, right? And so we always continually need women who are rising up and standing up and having inspirational voices that we can follow. Mosaic, America wanted to put a path forward, right? Where do we go from here? We want to always connect different people, different arts, and create conversations so that we all have a path forward collaboratively and co-creatively, right? And so today, we have our beautiful artists, 4 artists here, and culture bearers, who will basically show us what they have been doing, how they have been standing up, for what are they standing up, for whom are they standing up. And we will also attempt to connect all these conversations to place, be it San Jose, California, or America. We are also going to connect people to groups, individuals to people, and organizations. So I am definitely having such a great time introducing all our panelists. Let's start with Charlene Vasquez and Justina Palafox, who will represent our Native brothers and sisters here today, our Ohlone and Native people. And Charlene is the chairperson at the Confederation of Ohlone People. Justina is her daughter, and we'll hear more from them a little later. Then we have LaToya Fernandez, who is an activist, a multi-talented artist, and an educator in this San Jose local area. And then we have Shika Malaviya, who is a spoken word artist that Mosaic has presented several times. What I would like to do now is to actually begin the program with Charlene and Justina. And may I please ask the others to get off video, as I myself will. Charlene, you wanted to share a video. Could you tell us a little bit about what that video is about and why you wanted to share it and why you created it in the first place?
Sure. So,
Charlene, could you come back on
Here
video?
we go. Sorry. So I will say that for many years now, and it's just not myself and my daughter, but many Ohlone people are concerned about land issues and sacred sites and the protection of them. And the only way to get people to understand why it's so important is if we take them to those places and talk about those places. And it turns out that art is a great vehicle for creating awareness. To that end, we have photography that reaches way back in our family lineage. My grandfather, who was born in 1915, was a professional photographer and actually had a studio in downtown San Jose. And because of that, photography has kind of run through our blood. And then my grandmother, she has been sewing forever. And I started sewing with her when I was about 4 or 5 years old. not sewing by hand, but on her machine. So I learned how to sew on her machine. So we created this video to kind of talk about the importance of culture and tradition and legacy, and how that will help us to preserve culture, but also to share information and a message to the community. Justina, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah.
I think the video, when we were making the video and you're taking the pictures, it's a whole different feeling. And then when you see the video, it's kind of, it's just something you can keep and something you can show your family later on. I think the images are very powerful, and it's kind of like, is that us? Was that really us standing there? I just love the images, and I think each image just holds a story just by itself.
All right, so let me attempt to start this video. Give me a moment.
My name is Charlene Eigen-Vasquez, and I'm a descendant of the Ohlone people, right from Chautauqua down to Carmel.
My name is Justina Palafox. I am the daughter of Charlene Eigen, and I'm also a descendant of the Ohlone people.
Today we spent some time making ribbon skirts, and essentially we did this for a couple of different things. Usually Ohlone people, when they're dancing or when they're in ceremony, they'll often wear grass skirts, which we have our own grass skirts. The significance of the long skirt, it's not necessarily a form of modesty, but it's a form of respect to the Creator. And it's a reminder that we're grounded and that we're connected to Mother Earth. And so we really want our skirts to be all the way down to our ankles, to remind us of that connection to Mother Earth and to remind us to be humble and honorable. Recently, like many people or many women in a number of different countries, we've decided to go ahead and add ribbon to our skirts. And the ribbons today, and for us, signifies the remembrance of missing and murdered Indigenous women.
After we made the ribbon skirts, we decided to go to Mission San Juan Bautista, and we went over there. And you know, every time I go to a mission, I get this wave of emotion, and it's as soon as you step out of the car, it's just because I believe, because just all the ancestors that were there and what they went through. And it's kind of interesting because I look around and I see everybody else who's visiting other tourists, and I think to myself, are they feeling what I'm feeling? Can they feel it from the ground all the way up to your heart? And the power of the people that live there, you know. And I watch my children, and they're walking around and they're looking at the walls, and I let them feel what they feel. I don't tell them how I'm feeling, and I want them to get their own feelings. And of course I share the history, and I share what really happened, and what really happened to our people, and how the culture was stripped away and families were separated. And we kind of just walk around, and I think about, you know, if walls can talk, and what happened exactly where I'm standing. And do people, when they visit, do they think about that? And I will continue to take my children to the missions just so they don't forget, and we pay our respects for the people that were just trying to live daily there.
I would agree with that, and I think it's kind of an interesting perspective, because as we were walking around with our skirts and we were you know, taking some pictures. There were a few tourists that were kind of looking around and looking at us and probably trying to figure out what we were doing. And from a distance, I can hear them saying things like, "Oh, look at those pretty skirts," or really nice things, and they had no idea what was going on. And that's totally fine, except for it's just a reminder of how many people know what really happened at the missions, how many people really know the suffering that took place. In order to understand even the images, the photographs that were taken, you know, there's a photo of us standing near a cross, for example. At least when we're at the mission, I imagine what people thought. What did the Ohlone people think when they were there? What about the people that escaped? What about the people at the other missions who revolted? What was it like for them? It's a really hard place to be, but it's a place that, as Justina mentioned, is really important to go and visit and remind yourself of that history every now and then. What is it that stands out to you and makes you feel good about what happened?
It was a very hands-on. So my daughters are there picking out the ribbon, picking out their fabric, watching us sew. And even if they're ironing fabric, they're sitting in the circle with us. They're watching our hands. They're listening to us laugh. At the same time, we're making a beautiful skirt for each and every one sitting at the table. We're keeping the traditions. And when we made these skirts, hardly anything was written down. I literally repeated what we did from step one to the very end over, and that's how I remembered it. And then we got to wear the skirts that we made today, and then went to go to the mission. And it was a beautiful process to start with just fabric and then ending in a way with our ancestors and showing respect to the people that came before us.
All right, Charlene and Justina, let me welcome you back on video. You know, when I saw this video, it reminded me of my visit to the Santa Cruz mission. And I'm feeling overcome a bit, because for me, it was my daughter who was 10 years old. It was a school project. And so it was a tradition. It was a mother-daughter tradition, right? And then when we went to the mission, and there were these stark historical facts, and there were some pictures, and I was like, I just couldn't even comprehend the scale of the annihilation that went on, right? And I said, I'm here with my daughter, and here is destruction of so many generations, right? But then I remember thinking, what do I do with this emotion that I'm feeling, right? Who do I reach out to? Is there any action that I can take? Which is why, as part of our mission at Mosaic too, we're constantly thinking about how do we connect, people to history, people to our future? How do we together create a sense of a shared future? And I just wanted to kind of, Charlene, you had said something about how do we move forward from here and how everybody has to be inquisitive in their own way. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you can help, how the rest of us can stand up with you?
So one of the things that I think about is that we really are kind of limited in the ways that, Justine, are you tearing? It really is a hard thing. But what I was going to say is that the way that the visibility that there is for the Ohlone people, I would say, especially in the South Bay, is pretty limited. So Usha and Priya, who's not on camera right now, I just want to say thank you for opening that door. It's one thing to go out and speak in front of, county supervisors or, a city board to talk about, please don't dig up another ancestral burial ground. So that's one thing, but that's not on camera. Nobody can see it. It's, you know, it's whoever attends, and hopefully they hear our voice and our call to action and make the right decisions. But in this case, we actually can document our voices. And in this case, you know, we talked about before this event about making this video. So we made this video, put it on YouTube. It's not yet public. After this session, it'll be public. And it's interesting because when I check the boxes to try and figure out, okay, who can see this? Children can see this. They will be able to see this. And hopefully they ask questions, or mothers will ask questions. And I would say, you know, if we talk to our children, our own children, and teach them to be respectful, and teach them to think about history so that they do it for themselves, then we'll be in a better place. I also taught ethnic studies for a number of years, and my ethnic studies classes are not easy. And they would end up with people asking, what do I do? What do I do? I'm so sorry. Well, you don't have to be sorry to me, but what can you do? You can teach your children to explore for themselves and look for the truth themselves. And if they look for the truth, then hopefully some of these dark places in our history books will be lightened. The truths will be disclosed, and that would be helpful. I would say the other thing is just really think about how you walk on the earth. Walk gently and carefully and considerately, and think about who was there before. We built a relationship with a law firm and a nonprofit just recently, just within the last probably couple months. And now we actually have a place where people can donate money, and the money all goes to legal fees so that we can protect sacred sites, so that hopefully the next time there's an uncovering of a burial place, we can stop that, or at least mitigate whatever's happening there. But now we actually have, a law firm willing to help us, as long as we can raise some money to cover some of those fees.
Justina, would you like to add? You're a mother yourself, and I know from the previous program that we did that, 7 generations hold a lot of meaning. I mean, you can, would love for you to kind of touch about that a bit.
So yeah, I talk about that a lot. So when I was younger, my mom would take me to ceremony, and I was young, and I had friends, and I didn't really want to be there. I knew it was the right thing. So she took me to sweat, and she took me to ceremony, and she would always say, this is for the 7 generations. This is for people before you, and the people after you brought this for you, right? And so I would listen and participate. And then when COVID hit, it kind of just put my family in a hard mental place. We can't go anywhere, we can't participate, and I had to bring those teachings and bring the calmness in my house. And that's where it hit me. I even called my mom, and I was like, Mom, I get it. Like, I get it. What you were doing for me when I was younger, it's my turn to bring to my daughters and my sons and my brothers and my sisters. And so I'm doing that now still. But if I didn't have that history and I didn't have those teachings, we would be lost.
Yes, and that's part of the reason we want to have more programs like this, because we want to feel connected to history, not as a way of, there is anger, yes, but there is also a way forward. And this beautiful mother-daughter story that you've shared, and what you do every day for your own children, is a true inspiration. And I thank you both for being a part of our program tonight.
Thank you.
Yes. And so from, this whole tradition of passing on the traditions, passing on culture, passing on family values, how do you then do that to a whole city of youth? right? And to talk about that is LaToya Fernandez. LaToya, I initially thought, how am I going to introduce you? And then I said, you know what? It's simple. I'm just going to let you talk about your journey.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm just hearing this story, number one, as a mother, as an educator, and as a youth champion. I was very moved, very touched. I feel very strongly about how we use our experiences and we pass down our wisdom, and we share these truths, but also match it with the empowerment piece of letting our youth feel like, hey, like, I got your back. I'm going to hold your hand through this. Not only am I going to educate you and tell you these truths, but I'm going to stand with you and help you take action to make things better. And so, my experience comes from education. I've been a teacher. I also served as an administrator, as a dean of students. And about 6 years ago, I started my own community-based youth empowerment organization when I realized, particularly that youth of color lacked a lot of confidence in the classroom. They were afraid to ask questions. They didn't want to be called upon. And when I would talk to them about what was going on, it was interesting to hear them say, like, I don't picture myself going to college. I don't think it's possible for me to own my own business. I don't think I can get out of my situation. And I was like, wow, like, I'm thinking this is like not the 50s. Like, I don't understand what's going on. But I think our youth, they really hadn't seen themselves reflected in success and empowerment. What's been happening, and especially in our education system, is that they've been being taught about themselves and their ancestors from the lens of oppression. And so I love just how Charlene was sharing the cultural elements that, like, this is not a story of struggle and sadness and despair. This is a story of your ancestors who had empires, who have cultures, who have routines that they follow that keep us powerful. And so when I realized as a teacher that it was my duty to teach students the truth about who they were, that's when I stepped in my power. And what I saw as a result of that was students be performing at a high academic level. Actually, in my first year of teaching, I broke a teaching record and my students grew over 2 years in reading in 1 year. And that was because I taught them the truth. I told them who their ancestors were, and I showed them real examples of themselves, reflected. So I think that's really important. And I also believe that our youth need champions. They are the most ignored population of people. Everybody's always making decisions about our youth and not including them in those decisions. And I think that's a problem. If we're talking about reimagining a world where our future leaders understand what's going on and feel they have the power to make necessary changes, we have to start giving them that platform right now, asking them right now, what is it that you want to see? How can we make this world better, this city better, this county better? And not just listening to what they have to say, but bringing them to the table and helping and having them help us in the strategic planning of making new policies and making new systems that work for everyone and that are inclusive of everyone. And so before I share some of my music, I want to say our youth know what's up, and they're not racist. They're not sexist. They're not homophobic. They don't have anything against anyone's religion. They're actually looking at us as adults and they're like, get it together. You guys are making it hard for us. You're making it difficult for us. We don't care about this stuff. We just want everyone to be all right. They're empaths. So we need to start talking less and start listening to them and pushing their ideas forward. So I'm going to go ahead and share a video that I released. It's called Black Lives Matter. And I actually released this video before the Black Lives Matter movement got big and the George Floyd protests broke out. But this was an expression to me because I had a lot of friends asking, like, why do Black people have to say their lives matter? Like, what is that all about? I had students asking, like, what does this big movement mean? So I wrote this song, Black Lives Matter, to give an answer to that. This is why we're saying it. This is why it matters. And no one wants to have to say their life matters, right? So I'm going to go ahead and share that video, and then I'm going to perform something a cappella for y'all. Okay. So let me go to my share screen. Apologies, y'all. I actually want to make sure that the speaker is on. It turned off while we were here getting busy. All right, here we go.
You just know that life is becoming increasingly miserable for everybody. But when they find out who it is that's causing the trouble and who it is that's making life miserable, when they get tuned into that, then they're all going to be just like the Panthers.
Dear white America, why are you so pissed at me? Is it that my history eliminates the mystery? You deem me powerless, I'm undefeated, powerless. Resiliency is prowess, ascended the lotus flower. Told you couldn't kill me, desperate to play the part, not destined to be my equal, no matches to like the dark. Finishing out the starter was happy to birth the trauma. Ended up breeding artists, get hating the stretch marks. I'm embracing these four stars, people of fast cars. My people with slow starts refuse to play small parts. My people topping charts, delivering raw art. Can't oppress a generation when freedom is at heart. At heart. When freedom is at heart. No stopping it when it starts. When freedom is at heart. Community saddle. Black lives matter. You're mad that we said it. We're mad that we had to. The underground railroad took strategy. Who arrogant had to be could only come naturally. The Moors colonized Europe. Displayed apathy. Stole a perfect blueprint. Splash paint catastrophe. Disarm unarmed relics. Reverse psychology, blowing up shooting stars that brought you astrology. Despite the mission of total black execution, we show up to the table with peace as the solution. Embracing these world stars, people of fast cars. My people with slow starts refuse to play small parts. My people topping charts, delivering raw art. Can't oppress a generation when freedom is at heart. At heart. When freedom is at heart, no stopping it when it starts. When freedom is at heart, community saddle, Black lives matter. You're mad that we said it, we're mad that we had to. Yes, thank you all. So again, just like sharing that and saying like number one, and this is a message to our youth, you can't oppress a generation when freedom is at heart. When you are liberated in here, no one can hold you down. No one can hold you back. So I'm actually going to go ahead and perform an a cappella piece that I wrote specifically for my students. I'm going to perform an a cappella for you. Sitting on my throne, something to call my own. I gripped the microphone, accomplished on my own. But I wasn't alone. The skills becoming honed. The bay becomes my home. The woman finally grown. Fear no longer drives me. I've gained self-control. Tears no longer drown me. Even evolve my tone. It's in the atmosphere. Reality is clear. And as I lift the weight, my smile is finally real. Thought I wanted the deal, so I went for the kill. Rotating on that wheel, raindrops on the windowsill. All the money in the world could never take the place of a child in the hood with a smile on their face because they went to school, they had holes in their shoes, oatmeal cookies for lunch, success far out of view. But those students grew up. They never made the news. They became the teachers who believed in you. No excuses. The background seeming poor, they closed the door, El Salvador. The system doubts your potential, families hunger for more. They call you ELL, I'll call you language genius. They call you underprivileged, I'll call you hope that's gleaming. So even if society keeps their standard low, still walk across that stage. So much for what you didn't know. We're breaking barriers. The world was yours and mine from jump. So there's no way we'll ever give it up to Donald Trump. Those bodies in the dump. Those Asian girls were trafficked. Unsolved police crimes meets kidnapping. They blame the little girl. They said she pays the price because her exotic slanted eyes are just so enticing. She battles with her esteem. No one's wronging their rights. She thinks her beauty's only skin deep and cries at night. Strong queens, stand up. We must be the light. Strong kings, stand up. Teach us how to fight. The thieves come at night. The thieves come at night. So we actually need the youth to fight. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, LaToya. That was fantastic performance. And what is beautiful is that you had action-packed poetry, right? You use the arts to kind of put your message forward and to create a path forward. I have one question for you before we welcome the third artist. How do you combat second guessing yourself or combat self-doubt or thinking that you are not not, you are who others perceive you to be, right? How do you get, how would you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question, because confidence is a struggle, especially as a woman, being a woman of color, it's one of those things where I've had to accept a couple of things about myself. One, that there were no mistakes in my creation. That I was actually created the way that I am, as I am, to fit into who I am supposed to be for this world. And that's why it's so important to understand our history and have that awareness of who our ancestors are. Because once I learned that my ancestors were these strong African people who are kings and queens, I was like, wait, that's in my bloodline? So I don't ever need to feel like I'm less than. And then the other thing is understanding and distinguishing between positive self-talk and negative self-talk. I used to say things to myself like, hey, I'm powerful, but I have kinky hair. I'm powerful, but I'm Black. I feel uncomfortable about that. I'm powerful, but, and then I had to switch that language and change the word but to because, and accept those things as things that make me unique and beautiful. So now it's, I'm powerful because my hair is kinky. I'm powerful because I'm Black. I'm powerful because I'm a woman. There is a huge difference between how we feel about ourselves when we speak positivity and life to ourselves than when we speak defeat to ourselves. So even just switching one word, but, to because, makes all of the difference.
Oh, fantastic. I love that power of the one word. LaToya, thanks so much. And now we welcome Shika Malaviya. And, I love this segue into your segment, Shika, because, LaToya talks about how, you have to kind of see yourself in a different image. And you actually are going to personify a woman from the late 1800s who defied custom, defied tradition, defied the definitions that were, her lot in life, and actually made the journey from India to the US. And I'm going to bring up that powerful visual, but I'm going to have you start, talk about your own journey, about why you decided to do this.
Right. I just want to say, I knew this conversation that we're all having today was going to be powerful, but this is something else altogether. And, I think all of us are basically, through the work we're doing and also through what Mosaic is doing, as you said, we are all asking, how do we connect people to history? And I want to extend that to saying, how do we connect to history? And I think education begins from the South. And it is a search for identity. And even in my case, because, my parents moved here in the 70s, and many of us South Asians have that same narrative that the story begins with when my parents moved here. But that is not the case. There were Indians that came here. I mean, South Asians or Indians that came here way before our parents, way before all the doctors and engineers, even before the Sikh farmers that settled in Central California. And so as a South Asian, as an Indian, trying to grapple with my identity, because growing up, I went through a lot of racism, and I always identified more with being Indian and less with being an American. And I really wanted to know what my roots were, because, did my roots just begin in 1971 then? So I was doing a search on the internet on South Asian history, and I wondered who was the first woman who came here to the United States from India. And that question inadvertently led me here to this image. I want to say that this image, it is an exotic image, right? You have an Indian woman in a sari, you have a Japanese woman in her kimono, and then you have a Syrian woman here in all of her finery. And I was still, even though this picture might be disturbing in some ways or exoticized in some ways, I was just riveted, right? I wanted to know, who was this woman? Where did she come from? Why did she have this defiant, determined look? And so I found out that her name is Anandi Gopal Joshi. and that she was the first Indian woman to come to the United States to study medicine. And she was India's first medical doctor who was a woman. And I was just blown away. Why hadn't I ever heard of her before? I mean, this is part of our history, but I didn't read it in any book. And I just found out about this 4 years ago. And, you know, I'm almost 50. So I'm like, this is amazing. And I wanted to know more. So I started digging deeper and deeper. And her story is such an amazing one because, as you'd mentioned before, she had to go through so many hurdles in order to even cross what they called Kalapani or black waters, because they considered in Hinduism and in India at that time, crossing the ocean to be taboo. So I would like to invite all of you to journey into the life of Anandi Gopal Joshi tonight through poems imagined in her own voice. And there's a reason why I decided to do persona poetry. And that's because whenever her story was told in India, it was always told through the lens of her husband, who encouraged her to learn and in often violent ways. So I feel like her voice was suppressed in the story itself. And so I decided that I would attempt to write her story in her own voice and give her agency back to her. So anyway, I'd love to share some poems with you. And if we could get to the next slide, then I can
before hold your passion.
Yes.
I do have one announcement to make.
Sure.
To my dear audience, if please hang back with us, because after Shika's done performing her poetry, we are going to get all of the artists and culture bearers back. And you're free to ask us, send us your questions in through the Zoom chat, the YouTube chat, as well as the Facebook chat. We are welcome, we're welcoming of any and all questions. We will also have Robin back from the museum. So there's going to be San Jose Museum of Art, Mosaic America, Shika Malaviya, LaToya Fernandez, Charlene Vasquez, and Justina Palafox on the panel and open for you to ask questions too. And without more ado, I'm going to stop my video, and then Shika, I'm going to switch to the next picture.
Sure. Okay. So, so the first poem I'll be reading is called Outside the Chaukat. And chaukat means doorframe in Marathi. And here it represents the clear division between an Indian woman's world inside the home versus a man's world outside of it. Anandi Gopal Joshi, which people also refer to as Anandi Bai, was born in Kalyan, Maharashtra on March 31st, 1865, in a busy port town that is now a suburb of present-day Mumbai. It was a time when Indian society held on to their traditions and customs very fiercely in retaliation of British colonial rule and Western influence. So, outside the chaukat. If you want to know what happens in this bustling town by the sea, Kalyan, which in Sanskrit means well-being, but whose shores have thrice been plundered by the Mughals, the Portuguese, and the British, despite the shade of a fortress and a long city wall with 4 gates and 11 towers, whose welfare is erased and renamed Kalyan and Kalyan. Ask the men, for they are the ones who wear shoes that take them outside the chaukat. They are the lucky ones who, donning their turbans, smell the dung of many homes, hear the hum of horses' hooves, darken their hands with the ink of newsprint, read the cover of the day while sitting on a zopara in the courtyard, dragging a puff from a gurgling hookah. Whereas the women tiptoe softly, their bare souls hardened, walking from kitchen to cowshed to well, fingertips charred, from stoking the chulha, thoughts spilling over like water, from vessels balanced on their heads. Oh, what lies beyond a doorframe that make a splash and then evaporate? So the next poem I'll be reading, and I think we have an image with that as well. Yes. On the left is a picture of Anandi Bai as a student. And I think this was taken the first year when she had enrolled into medical college. And then next to that is a language primer, the kind that she might have read and learned English from. So At the ripe old age of 9, Anandibai was married to Gopal Rao Joshi, a widower who was 16 years older than her. Gopal Rao was an overzealously progressive man and was instrumental in encouraging Anandibai to pursue an education, but he often resorted to extreme behavior to get her to study. Despite the protest of Anandibai's family, who felt a woman's place was tending to her own family and not going to school, Gopal Rao emphasized learning English so that Anandi could pursue her dream of becoming a doctor, which sadly arose from the loss of her son, which she gave birth to at the young age of 14. Due to lack of access to medical care and the reluctance of Indian women to see male doctors, who were often European, Anandibai lost her son when he was only 10 days old. Anandi learns English. This new language is like balancing a marble on my tongue. The K in knife, silent. The T in brother, soft. Ajji says, why learn the bhasha of the Angrez who don't bathe every day, who eat the flesh of animals like a jungli, and call us heathen instead, with our heads covered and our feet bare? But my husband, he brings me books in Aval Angrezi. He says, I must learn it all, their language, their God, their modern ways, anything to help us cross Kala Pani, to hold their alphabets in my mouth and swallow before they roll away. All right, and so the next poem I'm going to read, and we have an image for that as well, is a picture of Anandibai's husband's letter, which he wrote to some missionaries asking them to try and help his wife. And then there's the ship which Anandibai sailed on. So she does eventually get to cross Kalafani. So call it fate or serendipity, but Anandibai's husband wrote a letter which was published in a journal called the Princeton Missionary Review. And it reached an American woman in New Jersey while she was in the dentist's waiting room. Anandibai's desire to become a doctor and help the women of her land resonated loudly with Mrs. Theodosia Carpenter of Roselle, New Jersey. And she wrote back to Anandibai immediately, offering her friendship and support. Anandibai and Theodosia exchanged letters for 3 years before she set sail on the City of Calcutta steamship for the US in 1883. Mrs. Carpenter, whom Anandi came to regard as a second mother, was waiting with her husband to receive her and give her a home as she pursued her medical studies. Riding the Meridian. Countless creases on these waters of ships traversing the ocean's face as the sun plays truant during our voyage. Mrs. X, my companion, draws notches in the back pages of her Bible, of days and nights feigning prayer, while eyeing my movements, wondering, what is it this Hindu is reading? Remarking how no book is as worthy as the black-bound one in her hands. Other passengers look at me unfavorably as I push bald potatoes and limp vegetables around my plate, holding a fork and knife gingerly, refusing animal flesh. I ignore their whispers of how I should be in third class with the ayahs. And yet I wish it were so, for I would find less pretense there and more color in conversation, no threats of conversion. But in each lip of land our ship touches, I take delight, a different scene as if from a storybook, Ceylon's tall palms swaying, Egyptian soil gleaming red, and England's cottony clouds like an umbrella over our heads. With the sun's daily revolutions, we move further and further from the equator at the speed of 4 to 6 knots, my sari rippling in salty air as I inhale the scent of a new world. The seas, neither black nor poisonous, but taking shape of the palm that holds it. How does that which has no color both bless and stain, all of us water? And I think of Copernicus, who stood by his convictions, who knew the true meaning of circumambulation, how it is us that revolves around what gives us sustenance and not the other way around. So the next poem will take us to Philadelphia, where Anandibai has arrived. Anandibai was admitted to the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania in the fall of 1883 and applauded for her courage in defying tradition and religion to get there. She impressed everyone with her confidence and mastery of English. In fact, I read that she was speaking English so much that she had forgotten how to speak Marathi. And I think that's so amazing that she had that kind of focus. So, but she maintained her culture and customs. She always wore saris everywhere. She modified them a little bit, but she always wore her Indian clothes. So above all, it was Anandibai's determination to help her countrywomen that moved everyone she met. They call me Lady of the Orient, and this poem is based on a reception that was held for her to welcome her. Though the darkest one in the room, I'm the brightest of them all, in a red pitambar sari, deemed Pompeian, belle of this ball. And as I shake their hands, 500 pairs, wearing gloves to protect me, they regard the spray of pearls hanging from my nose, my filigreed wrists of bangles glinting gold, the tiny kunku dot on my broad forehead, drawing stares and praise for this young Brahmin lady so brave, having come all the way alone from Serampore to the city of brotherly love to earn her doctor's coat. Madzenav Anandi Ahe, I want to say in my native tongue, so that I don't forget who I am, the young girl whose books once lay tattered in the cowshed, whose baby lived barely 10 days. I float like an Indian rose among the dull sea of cinched waists and bonnets in the parlor of the dean of the Women's Medical College, smiling till my cheeks hurt as they stumble out a new version of my name, Ananda Bai, remarking how exquisite is my English. And the next poem after that, and to me, this is really incredible, and I think we have a slide for that as well, is that imagine in 1883, in the town of Russell, New Jersey, Anandibai cooked a traditional Marathi meal of 18 dishes in the home of her host. She was so thrilled with the warmth and kindness that she was received with that she wanted to do something to return the hospitality. And so she decided to cook this feast. So it was held in the home of Mrs. Theodosia Carpenter, her host, and friends were invited, and they all sat Indian style cross-legged, and the women even had borrowed, or rather Anandibai had lent them her saris and her jewelry for that special night. So I've written this poem in ghazal form, and it's called When the Guests Sup as Gods. In my wildest dreams, never do I fathom tonight that I should turn them into feasting Indians tonight, not those whose vast plains they call their own, but proud Marathas from my faraway native tonight. All the fair ladies draped in woven bordered saris, hands spangled, necks spangled, shining bright tonight, as they swish across the inlaid floor like princesses in my colorful trousseau that belongs to them tonight. 18 squares hand-drawn in red and white powder on the dining room floor where guests sups as gods tonight, set with plates stitched from broad buttonwood leaves, a rich meal of spiced vegetables and fruit await all tonight. After a Sanskrit prayer blessing this feast is chanted, all eyes look up to me on how to proceed tonight. No spoons, no forks, nor knives, just their pale, bare hands, sampling 18 exotic dishes prepared by myself tonight. Fashioning small balls out of their food with pink fingertips, they pop them into their mouths like all of India does tonight. The meal ends with a serenade and sprinkling of rose water, bouquets of freshly plucked flowers given to each guest tonight. Oh, Anandi, see the red kunku on all their white foreheads, how the love of my new sisters makes this heart swell tonight. How are we doing on time, Priya? I just want to make sure I'm not,
We have about 3 minutes.
Okay, cool. So I think the next few poems give a glimpse into Anandibai's life in the United States as a student and as a visitor. Anandi Bai was constantly falling sick, and yet she approached life in America with wonder, curiosity, and gratitude. And she was unaware that she had tuberculosis. Despite her poor health, Anandi Bai managed to travel the East Coast and meet many people. Ebony, ivory, and silk. Over my doctor's white coat and the black beaded Mangal Sutra that lay snugly against my chest as proof of marriage. Tips of ivory in each ear, connected by tubes wrapped in fine silk, forming a parabola, a conduit of sound, from which hangs an ebony medallion, confirming proof of life through the steady gallop of beating heart and burbling lungs. And I wonder how this is not considered a type of precious jewelry as well, the stethoscope worn by a rare few of my sex. And the next poem was when Anandi Bai traveled to the northern part of New York, to the countryside. A visit to the springs. I will not let my pain interfere with anybody's happiness, not even my own. My body, still used to the tropics, unable to adjust, aches with every movement. And this headache, which is my constant companion, I ignore as we make our way through the countryside. In Troy, I try cucumber pickles that are unusually green. No one can tell me why, and I suspect they have copper in them. When I run a needle through a pickle, it turns bright red, and only then am I satisfied. Someone remarks how that is my doctor's mind. In Saratoga, the women roam freely without their bonnets, and their hair, like fine silk, flutters in the summer breeze as they visit the springs. I find out this is the land of the Iroquois tribe. I meet a squaw and we exchange notes on how different our Indianness is. As we part, she gives me a necklace of beads and calls me sister. I give her a copper 1/4 Anna coin with Empress Victoria on one side. And this next poem is, I really enjoyed writing it. And while researching, I found out that crazy quilting, or what we call patchwork quilting, was very much in fashion at the time. And all these women that Anandi met would gift her these small pieces of cloth. And Anandi was so excited about that. And she pieced together this quilt, which you can see here in the image. And she was really, really intent on finishing it before leaving the United States. And in the center of it, she's written her husband's name, Gopal Joshi. It's crazy quilt work. Resourcefulness knows no nationality among women tending the hearth. We are mistresses of improvisation, magicians of the ordinary. These fabric scraps, whose warp and weft seem exhausted, we collect like leaves till they are plenty, a motley come together haphazardly. No symmetry, no intentional design, just hardworking fingers patching together what seems out of order. This crazy work, an American pastime, becomes this Maratha woman's way to pass a summer filled with anticipation and premonition. So much to be done, so little time to do it, these gifted blocks of cloth, beating bright with love and generosity, become a quilt that covers my unseasonal chills, my malaise for which no cure fits. So the next slide, which we have, and there are no more poems, that was the last poem. When I found this out, this really blew my mind. So Anandi Bai graduated from medical school within 3 years at the age of 21 and returned to India in 1886. While she was criticized and maligned for wanting to leave India to pursue an education, on returning with her medical degree, she was celebrated and hailed as an example for other Indian women. Anandi Bai was supposed to serve as the physician in charge of the female ward of Albert Edward Hospital in Kolhapur, but she passed away from tuberculosis on February 26, 1887, and so she was not able to serve as a doctor. After being cremated, as per her wish, her husband sent her ashes to Mrs. Theodosia Carpenter in New Jersey, and they're interred in Poughkeepsie, New York, with the Carpenter family. Her gravestone reads, Anandabai, and it's interesting that her name is misspelled here, Anandabai, first Brahmin woman to leave India and obtain an education. So I hope I was able to convey a little bit of Anandibai's story here through these poems. And
Yes. I mean, one could certainly see the connection that you have with her, for sure, for sure. Hey, I have an immediate question, and at this point, I would like all of our panelists to come back on camera, and I encourage the audience to send us questions via chat on the Zoom and chat on the YouTube and Facebook channels that this is streaming out to. Shika, a question for you. The last slide had the word Brahmin. Right. And I was struck by that because that is a way of life, community, caste, however you want to describe it. But in India, and making sense more to Indians, why was it on her tombstone? Was it a widely understood term?
So, it's very interesting. I'm really glad you asked that question, because this is also something I kept on coming across in several news articles. And here, I mean, and especially now when there's, the Dalit movement and things like that, Anandibai did come from privilege. And at that time, I don't know if she knew exactly what it meant, because even if you were a Brahmin woman, you were supposed to remain at home. You were supposed to, just take care of your children and your family. But because of the missionaries that had come into India, and they familiarized themselves with Hinduism, and they familiarized themselves with the caste system, they also, brought that back with them when they came to the United States. And also theosophy was really big, and this fascination with occultism at the time, that it seems that, people here in the United States were fascinated with the fact that Anandibai was also a Brahmin, right? And in every news article that came in the papers, they kept on mentioning how she was a Brahmin woman. And while they celebrated that, whenever I would read about how Anandibai responded to it, I don't think she really thought that way. And I think the proof of that is that, being a Hindu, she first of all decided to cross waters which were considered taboo. She lived here alone. And after she passed away, she asked for her ashes to be buried in a cemetery among Christian people. So it's really interesting that how she was celebrated as being a Brahmin woman, but I don't think at all that she looked at herself like that.
How interesting. And what I like about, I asked myself, do we, why should we include Anandibai as as a voice in this program? And obviously she, her voice definitely needs to be heard. But what I loved about it is that, it shows us how America can be a nurturing place also, right? And it kind of reminded me of 20 years ago when I first made my journey to the US, right? The promise, ambition, safe harbor, home and belonging, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's all we want. We want to belong, right? And for so many of us, for so many years, this land, belonging has been elusive, right? And so that's why I wanted to kind of bring that connection in, because that is, she needed to come into her own as a doctor, and that doctorate and the medical studies, America offered it to her, right? So for me, that was like the most profound, apart from her own journey, that was a profound aspect, and why we thought that this absolutely has to be part of Mosaic America's artist lineup. Anandibai herself in first person, like you have presented her.
And it's not just her becoming a doctor. I don't think she knew who she was, or that she was allowed to be herself until she came to this country, because she was constantly being told by her husband what she needed to do. And she was constantly being told by her other family members what she shouldn't be doing. And once she came here, people wanted to know who she was, what her favorite color was, what her favorite names were. You know, there. In fact, Mrs. Theodosia Carpenter had this autograph book where she asked all these questions, like, what is your favorite place on earth, things like that. And she wrote her favorite place on earth was Roselle, New Jersey. You know, and that's saying something, you know.
It is saying something.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me. And yet she came on her own terms. She didn't want to convert to Christianity, because if she had, she would have probably arrived in the United States much sooner. But she stood her ground, but she thought all religions were equal, and she just wanted to be herself. And for whatever reason, I mean, all the circumstances brought together, by being in the United States, she was able to be herself, because she didn't have anybody else telling her who she should be.
Yeah, and see, that kind of brings it full circle, right? All the stories we've heard on this panel today, this one kind of is like the complement of the other stories, right? And LaToya is kind of like the bridge between how do you enable that? And on that topic, question for LaToya. As someone engaged in social justice work, how do you keep from getting depleted and down? Where do you draw your strength from?
Yeah, good question. I actually see self-care as a part of social justice. It's a part of the revolution. So there can be no revolution without self-care. A lesson that I had to learn, I didn't learn in my 20s. I was burnt out in my 20s. And I had a lot of really unhealthy habits, and I was very unhealthy in mind, body, and spirit. And when I came to understand that I could not pour into anyone's well if mine was dry, and that I didn't have to feel guilt or shame about taking steps back, I felt empowered by that. So taking naps is a part of my day. I take a nap every day. I get massages, I get my toes done, I get my fingernails done. And when I just want to take a minute to not do anything, I take a minute to not do anything, and I don't feel the need to explain myself to anyone. Because as women, we are such givers. We give to everyone all the time. So we actually don't owe anyone an explanation when we want to take time for ourselves. And so I stand by that, and I stand in that, and I get my strength from that, and knowing that, like, I have the right to take my space.
Mm-hmm. I know we're over time, but there is I would love to kind of have you guys here for a few more questions. Actually, Justina and Charlene, can you also talk to how to not be feeling overwhelmed by sometimes, right? There is a generational, I want to say, cross you bear or burden, right? That you feel like you have to, you cannot even take, like LaToya says, take a few minutes to yourself because, oh my God, my ancestors suffered so much and I have to give so much to my future generations, right? How do you deal with that on a daily basis? Justina, you as a newer mother than Charlene.
You know what? It's you kind of just know it's your place. You put one foot in front of the other, and you just keep going. I think LaToya brought up a very important point is you do have to take time for yourself, and you have to make sure your mental health is on a positive note. And you just keep going, and you kind of don't have a choice. You have to stand up for your people, and you have to keep the stories going. It was just something that I was brought up with. So in my perspective, in my opinion, I don't have a choice but to keep going. I don't have a choice but to keep telling my stories so that it doesn't get lost.
Charlene? Also, there's a follow-up for you, Charlene. The appointment of Deb Haaland as our Native American, as our first Native American woman as Interior Secretary is tremendous. Could you kind of answer both questions? I mean, just comment on both.
Sure. So having a Native American woman as a Secretary of Interior is just super amazing. And I think partly is because So you think about something like, if anybody followed all the events around Standing Rock, she actually was there. So she's not just a person and just a Native American person, but she's there on the front lines and understands exactly what's happening. So that's super important. The other part is that by being a witness to all of that, then we trust that she'll relay the messages that need to be shared appropriately and truthfully and honestly, and collaborate to come up with some good solutions. So that's number one. So that's super exciting. And then in terms of keeping your power, this is a long talk, but it's really about paying attention to everything around you. So Justina's right about being centered and taking care of your own health. But the other part is just paying attention to everything around you. And here's one little short story, and people know me, I can tell lots of stories. I was in my 20s and late 20s, when I went back to college or went to college. I went from high school to work right away to help my mom. And then in my late 20s, I went to college, and I'm sitting in my first class. I'm there, maybe just a few sessions in, and there was a gentleman next to me, and he was clearly 30 to 40 years older than me, much older. And I'm sitting there and I'm ready to go. I'd been wanting to go to college since I was 5. And he asked me a question, and I don't exactly remember my response. And he looked at me and he said, "You're so optimistic. How do you keep hope?" And I said, "How can I not be hopeful?" And I've always thought about that. And every time I forget, some person comes into my life and says, "Charlene, what about this?" And I'll give some apparently optimistic point of view. And I think while the walls are crashing all around you, sometimes it appears, it's that ability to see the next generation and keep that in your mind. But again, of course, just constantly also watching your health is super important. Taking breaks is super important. When people know that you're a hard worker and you say, "Guess what? My phone's going to be off for this weekend," they respect that because they know that you're always available. So that's kind of important. And I totally appreciate the circle of people around me.
I'm so glad this is getting recorded. So anytime I'm going to feel down, I'm just going to play this. We have a observation by Sherry, and she says, "In my Jewish upbringing, we were taught about predecessors who become successful and or contributed to society and had forged a path for others. Is that also part of Indian youth's education, to know about your own people? Or was it because Anandibai was a woman and you hadn't learned about her?" I guess Shika, she's kind of asking about,
Right.
yeah.
This is a very interesting question, which I have been mulling over. And that's why I feel so strongly about women's narratives. So Anandi Bai's story was turned into a play in a Marathi play in the region where she comes from, Maharashtra. There are quite a few people who know or knew who she was growing up, but in the rest of India, not so much. And I think it's because I think you have a point. I think a lot of times women's stories are sidelined. They might be celebrated in a play, or they might be celebrated. There are biographies. I think there were 1 or 2 biographies of hers that were written, a novel and a biography, in fact, that were written in the early 1900s. But no, voices are often sidelined. And I think because we had such a contentious history with the British, and there was so much nation building and the freedom fighting, that there are a few people who actually get more credit, or who we focus on, rather than the women who forged different paths and were able to bring change. And I think that's why it's so important to excavate these stories and bring them out into the open. And I've seen that happen in the past 10 years. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see what it brings. But I think you'll find that in history around the world, how it's very exclusionary to women's stories. And I think it's up to all of us artists to change that,
Yes, and Robin, you're it now. So speaking to all of our, all of what was shared today, and especially to Shika's last point about how, um, some stories need to be told, right? And I know the San Jose Museum of Art does a great job in highlighting some of that work, right? So, but I'd like you to comment on this one observation by Prakriti. And she says, as immigrants, and I'm assuming as minorities as well, in the interest of assimilating ourselves, we tend to disintegrate ourselves. Energies are put into fitting in instead of belonging. So how do we be conscious and convicted to holding on to who we are? And why I want to put you on the spot with this one is because, the museum is also a place that unearths a lot of identities, right? And stories. And so how do you see a museum's place in building connections with community, place, people, history, future?
You are putting me on the spot.
But I know you can handle it.
I kind of have sort of two things in mind to talk about to answer that. One is to say that the San Jose Museum of Art is a contemporary art museum. And the reason that that's an important distinction is because the work that we show is the work of our time. It is by us, about us, for us. It is who we are right now in this moment. So it both reflects that and sort of drives that conversation. We don't have that long view of history. Academics and other important people haven't looked back and decided that it was good art or bad art. They haven't decided its value. We get to decide that for ourselves in the moment as we're looking at it. And that's a really precious gift, I feel, because speaking for myself, museums were very important to me as a child. Partly because I grew up in a big family. I have a lot of brothers. It was noisy. Museums were not home and they were quiet. And for whatever reason, whatever crazy reason, my parents were very willing to drop me off at 10 in the morning and come back and pick me up at 5 in the afternoon. So they were like a sanctuary for me. But every important thing I think I ever learned in life, I learned in a museum. And so to me, it's another avenue to learning. It's another avenue to seeing yourself, to seeing other people, to understanding other cultures. I can clearly remember as a child standing fascinated in front of a history exhibition about the Aztecs. And I was just transfixed. I can remember as a very small child standing in front of Picasso's Guernica and looking at that gigantic black and white mural about war. And I will never forget it. So art has that power to move us. But the thing about contemporary art is it's about us. It's who we are. It's what we are. It's what we're thinking. It provokes conversations, but it also has that ability to validate them as well. And I think that that's really important. The other thing this whole conversation made me think of, and the reason that I wanted to do this and that I think it's really important is because I want to tell you a little story of my own. In 1895, a baby girl was born in a small town in Massachusetts. She was blonde and blue-eyed, and she was very sharp-witted and musically gifted. When she graduated from high school, it was expected that she would get married and start a family, but her sister came down with diphtheria. And so the other kids were sent away to protect them. So she was sent to a music school in New York City and to get an education because they had to send her someplace. And the only other choice was California, and that was too far away. So they sent her to New York. She went to music school. She met a man there who was kind of just a middle of the road, unimpressive vaudeville entertainer who had this act, and he took it up and down the Eastern Seaboard, and he needed a pianist to accompany him. And so he invited her along, and she went. And they went up and down the Eastern Seaboard. And at one point they went to Cuba. And for 10 years, she traveled around. Oh, it was almost 10 years. She traveled around with this guy and just went to all kinds of entertainment venues. And she had a life. When she turned 31, her family called her home and she went home. She met a man, she got married, she started a family. She lived the life she was expected to live. But for 10 years, she had a life of her own. She had a life that she chose, that was of her own making, her own design, that was sprang from her, from who she was and her talents. That woman was my grandmother. And I never found this story out until I was like 25. You know, I was an adult when I found this out. My grandmother never talked about it. And so I asked her about it one time. She wouldn't tell me about it. So my brother and I went and looked up a bunch of stuff about her and this guy she lived with. And it was really interesting. But the thing about it is, that story may not have mattered to her, but it mattered to me because I suddenly understood that there was this woman who didn't, for a period of time, had a life of her own. And it made me feel like I could choose that too. And it changed everything for me. It was like the ground shifted under my feet. And I suddenly was like, oh, this is my life, mine. I get to do what I want. And so I did. And if I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't heard that story, because I didn't feel that sense of entitlement that LaToya is talking about. I didn't feel that. I didn't have anybody to give that to me. And so that's why I think these stories, whether, you know, and you know, she wasn't some fantastic pianist and neither was he. I guess he was just sort of a, you know, a funny vaudeville guy. They didn't win any prizes, but they chose something for themselves. And I think that's the really important part. And I think young women today need to know that they stand on very strong shoulders, that there is all this history. The fact that nobody ever told them doesn't mean it isn't there. And it does matter and it is important. And these are our voices and our histories. And we get to own them.
Absolutely. And you have beautifully concluded and summarized the reason we are all here for this 75-minute program. Thank you so much, everybody. The chat is full of compliments to each and every one of you. And I'm hoping to download it and send it your way. We are unable to take any more questions because we're reaching the 90-minute mark. But thank you again, Shika, Robin, Charlene, Justina. We lost LaToya to another obligation, but LaToya too. Thanks so much. And to the audience, if you like what you saw, please follow us, Mosaic America, mosaicamerica.org. We are on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on Insta. Reach out to us, email us, info@sangamarts.org. We would love to have you in any capacity, as an audience, as an artist, as a volunteer, as a team member, however. Again, thanks everybody, and I give you back your evening.
Thank you so much, Priya, too. And thank you to all the panelists for being with us. It was an honor, really, to be among such great women. And I was so pleased that we had a mother-daughter team with us tonight. So thank you so much for being with us, everybody. And we look forward to future collaborations with Mosaic.
Absolutely. We're counting on it. Thank you.
Priya.
Bye, everybody. Have a great evening.